This is Dr. Matthews. This discussion is about infections of the gastrointestinal system. And every slide in here will remind you to wash your hands and be careful that your cooking surfaces are clean. Well, first, I guess these may not, but first we're going to talk about the resident flora of the GI tract. This is an active ecosystem that is there for your good and also for the good of the bacterium. Antibiotics can throw the balance off and let other things grow. Probiotics are supposed to help them replenish. I think it's probably a good idea if you take antibiotics to follow them up with probiotics, because antibiotics really will hurt your guts. The oral cavities, where we're going to start first. There are over 700 species, normal species, in the oral cavity, and about 50% of them have not been identified. At birth, your mouth is sterile. It rapidly becomes colonized. I mean, that's the first place you take in food. That's entry to your body. And there's a lot of germs in the human mouth. Stomach, very few bacteria because it's so acid. Very few can survive. If you do get Helicobacter pylori, they can cause gastritis or ulcers. They are a major cause of gastric ulcers. And this was discovered back in the 80s. Two scientists in Australia did a research study. They kept culturing this off of people with ulcers. They took biopsies of the ulcers and would be able to culture this over and over again. So they drew straws, and the one that got the short straw actually put some of the Helicobacter bacteria, the pure stuff, into a drink and drank it. And they did colonize his stomach, and he got gastritis. And then he got better, but his wife said he had halitosis so bad that she couldn't stand him, so he took antibiotics and he got better. You want to smell his stinking breath. Resident flora of the small intestine. Now, this is an easier environment to survive in. Of course, anything that gets there has got to get through the stomach, but if they go through quickly, they may survive. Now, you do have peristalsis moving things through rapidly, and then pancreatic juice and bile going in to the duodenum. So the small intestine, you're still going to have less populations than you do in the stomach. Gram-positive bacteria, lactobacilli, and this should be uppercase. I don't know why, this is not my typo. And Escherichia fecalis are some of the inhabitants of the small intestine. And this is a typo I would have taken out had I noticed, but oh well. Large intestine, this is where most of your bacteria are. Slow flow rate. Stuff stays in your large intestine a long time. The bacteria colonize, reproduce. There are about 1,000 species present. About 20% of healthy feces is just bacteria from the colon. Now, what these bacteria are eating leftovers that you couldn't digest. They also produce some of the vitamins that we need and don't have to take. Like one thing, vitamin K, most people don't really have to take vitamin K because your gut produces it. And as long as you have this nice, healthy gut flora, chances are that your gut will stay healthy. Cavities, dental caries. The oral cavity is a huge, great environment for microbes. We have very foul mouths as humans. Dental plaque is a biofilm on the teeth, and it sits there. Now, if you brush your teeth every day and floss, it won't build up as fast, but you need to have this removed professionally. Clean your teeth, they say every 6 months for most people. And if you don't, you could get cavities or caries. Gingivitis is once the gums have actually become inflamed. Periodontitis, the whole tooth is starting to decay. You can lose a teeth and you can get systemic infections. It can affect your heart valves. It can infect the arteries to your heart and contribute to a heart attack. Okay, this is the anatomy. Any cavities can be anywhere in here, just from nasty teeth that aren't brushed, or just from maybe you haven't got the genetics to have great enamel. And if that's the case, you really need to have good dental care. You see this root canal here with all the nerves and arteries and veins coming in here. Now this is the gingiva, and if you have bacteria that grow up along the gingival line, anaerobic bacteria can invade here and start causing separation of that tooth until your periodontal ligament is infected. And once this happens, you can actually lose this tooth. You can also lose a tooth and get an abscess in it just from a cavity that erodes so bad, but that would really, really hurt. Gastroenteritis is inflammation of the stomach and intestine, and you get it from microbes that you ingest or toxins that you ingest, which are generally made by microbes. And this is one of the leading causes of death in developing countries because they get dehydrated and they don't have a way to properly rehydrate. In healthy individuals, you're going to get tired of barfing and having diarrhea, but you usually don't die. Diarrhea, loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, cramps, and other abdominal discomfort. Causes: contaminated food, organisms or toxins in the food, contaminated water, contact with infected people. I actually know a person who had a very big political disagreement with a former a person in the state politics, and she had gastroenteritis, and she went up to shake his hand and licked her hand first. Now, if he had any sense, he would not shake hands without washing hands afterwards. You don't put your hand on your face if you've been shaking hands. Unwashed hands, dirty utensils, contaminated workspaces. Now, also, something that's not mentioned here are toxins. Other things can cause gastroenteritis. Too many NSAIDs, too many steroids, other drugs, drinking large quantities of alcohol. Anything that's irritating to the gut can cause symptoms of gastroenteritis. Bacterial infections, these are a very common cause of foodborne and illness, and it's a bacteria or their toxin. If it's an actual infection, the bacteria is going to enter the GI tract and multiply. But some, you just get the toxin. You know, potato salad was made at the cookout, and it sat out in the sun, and bacteria multiplied and produced toxins, and you don't get the bacteria, but you do get the toxin. Helicobacter pylori is, again, we talked about that a little bit already. Very common, and it's not everybody who gets it is going to develop an ulcer or even gastritis. Don't really know where it comes from. Food, water, kissing. So anyway, treatment, antibiotics and antacids, and then stomach lining protection drugs. And this is a piece of an intestinal tract here, and you're showing the bacterium actually sitting there. Salmonellosis symptoms include diarrhea, fever, abdominal cramps, 12 to 72 hours after initial infection. Usually subsides in 5 to 7 days. If it becomes septicemia, then they're going to put you on antibiotics. Now, one would say, why not put you on antibiotics immediately? But if you remember, these organisms that are gram-negative, if you start killing off the salmonella or an infectious E. coli, you're going to kill off the normal flora. You're going to get a lot of endotoxin released, and you can just make things worse. So what they like to do is just watch. Now, if someone becomes septicemic, it's a real serious situation, real high fever, they're going to put you on antibiotics. These are usually treated with IV fluids, or if the person's not real sick, just fluids at home, Gatorade, Powerade, whatever. Prevention: don't eat undercooked eggs, poultry, or meat. No non-pasteurized dairy products. No cross-contamination. I went to a place where I think it was Chinese food, but they cooked the food right in front of you. It's like at a mall, you're waiting in line. And they had some raw chicken that they turned or put on thing with a fork type thing, and then they reached and grabbed up the food they were going to give to me with that fork that had just touched the raw food. And I said, you can't do that. And he said, it's clean, it's perfectly clean. So I just walked off. Anyway, separation of uncooked meats and produce and from cooked foods and ready to eat foods. And if you are putting things in your refrigerator, you want to put the meat on the bottom rack and something that you're going to just eat like a piece of cake higher up, because you don't want salmonella juice dripping down on the cake. Wash hands, wash cutting boards, wash countertops, wash, wash, wash. And generally, originally, these come from the fecal contamination is where all this comes from. Typhoid fever is Salmonella enterica serotype typhi. And this is a very serious type of salmonellosis. Sudden onset of sustained fever, headaches, nausea, abdominal pain, constipation or diarrhea, cough, and this is a life and death thing sometimes. So they will give you antimicrobial therapy. And there's a lot of these antibiotics are resistant. I mean, it's resistant to a lot of antibiotics. Years and years ago, when we'd go to camp, you had to take a typhoid fever shot before you could go, a vaccination. I don't know if they even give those anymore, because you're going to go and swim in the lake. Now, since this comes from fecal contamination, what does that tell you about those lakes? That they were not something you want to swim in. I'm glad I didn't know why we had to get it. Paratyphoid fever, very similar to typhoid. It's Salmonella enterica. Contaminated food and water. It can be transmitted from animals to humans or from humans to humans. Campylobacter. Campylobacter jejuni, fetus, coli. Jejuni is the leading cause of bacterial diarrhea in the United States, mostly in children and young adults. Again, handling raw poultry is not just salmonella. Eating undercooked poultry. I'll come back to this. Raw milk, handling human or animal feces, the non-chlorinated water. If you have a well, it needs to be checked for coliform bacteria. And if it doesn't come up clean, then it has to be treated. We had this problem. We finally just got one of those deep wells put in, and it was not, it worked out a lot better. But there was a neighbor of ours that kept having their well come up positive, positive, positive for bacteria. They couldn't use the water without boiling it. And it wasn't a month or two later, someone was, I think a deer hunter was out and looked. They noticed an old well they thought was a dry well. They looked down in it and there was a dead cow. Somebody had thrown a dead cow in the well. Well, it wasn't dry and it connected with the other well. So they had to get a backhoe and get the cow out and bury it properly. Somebody was trying to save money on a backhoe on a cow that died. So anyway, be careful what you drink. But undercooked poultry is a bad thing to do if you don't cook it properly. Escherichia species gastroenteritis. Now, E. coli is a normal bacteria in your gut. There are pathogenic strains, and they do have enterotoxins, and they can be very dangerous. I'm sure you probably have all heard about some of the water parks. I think Whitewater had an episode. A kid had diarrhea in the water everyone was playing in, and I just don't know that children in diapers need to be in public facility pools. But anyway, the kid crapped the pool, mixed all in, and there wasn't much chlorine in the water, and it ended up being a disaster. So a lot of people got really sick. Some people went into kidney failure. I think some children died because their kid had diarrhea and they took them to Whitewater. They crapped the water. Other bacterial infections, Yersiniosis. This is Yersinia enterocolitica, and it causes, diarrhea and vomiting. It just has a variety of symptoms. Listeriosis is a really serious food poisoning caused by contaminated food. It's got to be fecal oral contamination. And this is in soft cheeses, some unpasteurized cheese products, but it's been found in lunch meat, hot dogs. Now, how the hot dogs are cooked, and they're packaged in what should be sterile packaging. Somewhere along the line, they had to have had unclean assembly of those packages, somebody with dirty hands, or maybe they didn't clean their tables there, and whatever is holding the hot dogs, maybe they didn't clean them and rats got on them at night. I don't know, but it's fecal contamination, so it's a really bad thing. Here's the deal, is it can infect the nervous system. It's the highest mortality among foodborne diseases. It kills old people and fetuses. So pregnant women don't need to eat this kind of stuff. Just forget about it. You don't need it. It may be good, but if it had listeria, it could infect the nervous system of your unborn child and actually kill the baby. So it's very dangerous. And it kills old people. I remember an interview I saw on a TV documentary about a case of listeria, and there was an old man, and he said, "We've worked all our lives, and I was just so looking forward to retirement with my wife, and now she's gone because somebody served her bad food." That's just really sad. Botulism, very interesting. It is a toxin. Botulism toxin is what causes the problem. It is a neurotoxin, also an exotoxin. It causes a flaccid paralysis, so think limp, foodborne, and home canned food is notorious. Remember, if it's a Clostridium, they make endospores. So if you don't get the food hot enough, and boiling is not hot enough, no matter if you boil it for a week, it's not hot enough. It's got to be put under pressure to get up to over boiling temperature. And the food is not going to keep. I mean, if you're not going to cook it, it's fine to cook green beans at a low temperature if they're fresh. But if you're canning them, they've got to be pressure canned. And it's not just green beans, it's soups, it's other issues. Okay, they become weak, dizzy, blurred vision, abdominal pain, just limp, weak, can't walk. I already said weak, but respiratory paralysis is what causes death. Now, this is where your history is so important. If multiple people in one family come in with weakness, can't stand up, they're falling over, signs of paralysis, and it happens suddenly, think botulism. Staphylococcus intoxication. We're talking about the toxin. It's not necessarily that you're getting an infection with staph. It's that food may have sat out at a picnic and then you ate it. And contaminated food, hands to food. I know that some people are really big on, we don't need the kids to eat potato chips, we need something better. So you take potato salad to the cookout. Well, if it sits out for several hours, it could become infected and it could develop a toxin and make everybody sick. But contaminated hands, dirty hands. And this is showing the bacterium. But it's not necessarily that this bacterium is actually infecting you. It's a matter of, you can see the clump here, it's a matter of that the toxin is infecting you. Cholera, Vibrio cholerae. This can be mild or without symptoms, but it can cause diarrhea, vomiting, leg cramps from loss of potassium. This comes from generally contaminated water contaminated with human feces. So it's generally after natural disasters. I would not want to eat drink the tap water in Haiti right now. They just had a major earthquake and now a hurricane. It's too much, or a tropical storm. Their water has probably been contaminated. It's very sad. And what you can do in a natural disaster is boil the water if you have to, but also delivering people bottled water to drink. But they call it rice water diarrhea, and that's because little things that look like chunks of rice come out with it, and what it is part of your intestinal tract. It's just the lining. It's loaded up with pathogens, and so anyone who is cleaning up after you is also apt to become infected. Now, we're on viral infections. Rotavirus is the most common cause of infectious diarrhea in infants and children. 50% of hospitalizations of children for diarrhea are due to rotavirus. There are some vaccines that are being worked on. Several others, astro and caliciviruses, same old thing, diarrhea, headache, malaise, feeling bad, nausea. Norovirus, diarrhea, nausea, muscle aches, headache, fatigue, fever. Some of the adenoviruses can cause respiratory illness, and they can also cause GI illnesses. Hepatitis. Hepatitis A is a foodborne illness, and it is fecal-oral route. So get this, you've got to have eaten something that's contaminated with human feces. Food that's just been handled by unwashed hands is one way you can get it. Some of the seafood, raw oysters, some undercooked shellfish can cause it. Now, the issue with this, why would something in the ocean have human feces? It's because someone's not treating their sewage water properly and they're dumping it in the ocean. Okay, candidiasis, overgrowth of candida. And generally this is going to be somebody who is either immunocompromised or on antibiotics. Oral candidiasis is called thrush. And I've actually seen one of these in a person. and it's like the surface of the tongue was like sloughing off, and they had to take medication, an antifungal. Now, why is this under bacterial? Let's draw a line there. An antifungal medication. Aspergillosis is a fungal infection found in soil, food, compost, agricultural buildings, air vents, in homes and offices. So you can either eat it or breathe it. Toxic effects can cause acute hepatitis, immunosuppression, and even cancer. Ergotism is an interesting one, Claviceps purpurea. This contaminates rye and wheat, and I believe barley is also another one, and produces toxic alkaloids that cause hallucinations. They can also cause GI upset, dry gangrene, painful and burning in the limbs and extremities, which is called St. Anthony's fire. Now, this is, some people say this may be what led to some of the Salem witch trials. They had ergotism. They had bad wheat or barley, and so they're eating this food, and it's cooked, it's still in there. They're eating this food, they're hallucinating. And some people hallucinated, maybe they hallucinated that they flew on brooms. But people were getting this painful burning, and they said it must be a curse, which was real logical back in the Salem witch trial days. If you're getting this weird symptoms, it's probably a curse, and nobody thought of a toxin. And so they'd figure out who was the weirdest or who they didn't like, and they'd have a trial and see if they were a witch. And a whole lot of people were killed during these witch trials. And what they really needed to do is eat something besides their contaminated rye and wheat and barley. Parasitic infections, protozoans, Giardia, and they have Giardia intestinalis and Giardia lamblia. This lives in the guts of humans and animals, and it's a very common waterborne disease. The common scenario is someone drinks out of a creek, beautiful, nice mountain stream, and they get diarrhea. Now, what they're not thinking about is that just upstream from them there could be a bear or an elk or a deer that's taking a dump in that creek. And your book has intestinalis. Lamblia is what I have understood is the most common species, but it's relatively common. If you're going to hike in the woods, you need to have a filter that will filter out Giardia-sized particles. Bacterium coli, this is very prevalent in the tropics with poor people, and it grows normally in the cecum or colon of pigs, monkeys, perhaps other livestock. And then those animals get in water, defecate, and then you drink that water, and it makes you sick. Can be very, very dangerous. So you got to, if you're going to eat water with turds in it, you need to boil it anyway. Parasitic infections. Okay, Entamoeba histolytica. It is present to some degree in about 10% of humans worldwide, mostly in underdeveloped countries. And they contaminate water with feces. Why do they do that? Because they don't have proper sewage disposal. Maybe it washes in by rain. Maybe they don't have privies or a sewage treatment plant. Maybe they just throw their bucket in rinse it out in the creek. But whatever, they're drinking contaminated water, and then they get this diarrhea from it. Cryptosporidium or Cryptosporidium. Again, fecal oral route through contaminated water or undercooked or cross-contaminated food. Okay, you have a plate here. It's got the raw food in it right here. You've got a bowl over here for the cooked food. You don't take the raw food and cook it and stick it back in this bowl. You've got to have it, put it in a clean bowl. And I'm really weird. I don't usually cook much. I certainly don't fry much anymore, just for health reasons. But I used to fry chicken, and if I use the same chicken, the same spatula or tong to put the chicken out into the clean dish, I would hold that under the boiling grease for a little while, and then I would take the spatula and put the food over here. Don't cross-contaminate. Life cycle of Cryptosporidium. This is a typical lifestyle here. You have human. They drank some bad water. They have the mature oocyte is ingested, and then they become sporozoites. They attach to the gut. They undergo schizogony, and I mentioned that in another talk. And schizogony is where you have the nuclei multiply over and over and over and over and over again in one cell before becoming multiple cells, and that cell ruptures. And they also have sexual forms that fertilize and produce new oocysts. But the oocysts are in the feces. If the feces gets in the water, it's contaminated water, then you see these kids enjoying playing in the water. You know, they start dunking each other, water gets in their mouth, they're going to ingest some. Just something to keep in mind. If you're swimming in natural bodies of water, you don't want it in your mouth or nose. Parasites, helminths. This first one is a Trichinella spiralis. This is from undercooked or contaminated meat, usually pork. Now, most of the pork that we have now is raised on concrete slats that they can hose, and they don't sit there, and they're not out grazing and getting in the wild and eating rats and things that carry trichinella. And it seems very mean, and the boxes they're in are too small. And so it's a big fad right now to have naturally raised pork. They're out grazing in the woods. They feed them too. But these animals are going to be a lot more apt to give you trichinosis. So there could be a resurgence of it now that the natural, more humane care of livestock is back in fashion. Okay, Taenia, this tapeworms. And we have two types mentioned, though there are many types, many other types. But the beef tapeworm is Taenia solium, Taenia saginata. Went the wrong way, sorry. And the pork is Taenia solium. So you eat larvae in contaminated meat, and then it forms into an adult tapeworm in your gut. And it attaches to the wall of your gut and absorbs your nutrients. It make you lose weight, but it can make you be malnourished, not get the vitamins you need, the protein you need. But you will lose weight, but I'm not sure that I'm willing to try to get infected with it. But again, most of our beef and pork is inspected, and the pork is most of it's raised off the ground. But still, if something looks funny in a piece of beef, you might want to just dump it and trim it out. Okay, pinworm infections, Anaerobius formicularis. They live in the rectum of humans. This is the most common worm infection in the United States. And it's mostly school-age children, preschoolers, and those who are around them that get it. So it's children. And what happens is that when the child's asleep, the worms mate inside their rectum. When the child's sleeping, the pregnant, well, I don't know if you call her worm pregnant, but the worm who has the eggs, the fertilized eggs, sticks her head out of their little rectum and lays eggs around the anus. That's the anus. And it makes their butt itch. And so what's a kid going to do if their butt itches? They're going to scratch it, right? Well, these things are really easy to spread. They dry out. They can land on a piece of furniture, they can land on a doorknob, and you get this contamination yourself, and you can get them. I know a school teacher that teaches third grade, and she came home passing worms, and her husband started passing worms. You can buy over-the-counter pinworm medication at the drugstore, any drugstore, even Walmart pharmacist, over the counter. It's because the parental pamoate, it's the drug in it. Unless you concentrate it down, it's just really, really hard to overdose and make somebody sick with this drug. Very safe. You follow instructions, and it's extremely safe. Don't go to the ER at 3 in the morning. Just get up the next day. If you see worms in your kids, try deworming them. Okay, that's supposed to be a pinworm. This is a tapeworm, and yeah, there's a scolex. That's the head right there. That attaches to your wall, and this is showing, oh, that's just centimeters, but these can be very long. They can be several meters long, and I've seen when I was involved in some research at Fort Valley State University, I had to do an autopsy on a small goat that died, and it had 5 or 6 tapeworms that were, let's see, you may not think in meters, you may think in yards. They were at least 2 yards long, over 2 meters long, and that wasn't what killed the goat. It was a different parasite, actually. Okay, so it goes through the intestines, migrates, gets up into the lungs, is coughed up and swallowed. Then it attaches itself to the intestinal wall and sucks blood. And you can become very anemic from this. And it's not typical anymore because we have flushing toilets, which are huge to health. But people who have been in areas that may have unsanitary conditions, or even just a good decent outhouse, can prevent this, because you have somewhere to put the poo. Animal hookworms, can they infect humans? They can get in the skin, they can cause little streaks, but there's really not any types that are common to our area that can make it all the way to the gut and reproduce. That's an Ascaris. That's a roundworms. And a kid can have a bundle of those. Now, if they have a bundle of those in their belly's going to be swollen up and very disgusting. And puppies and kittens can have roundworms. And can they spread them to your kids? Not in the adult form, but they could cause serious illness. If they get in the kid eats, they have to literally eat the eggs from these worms. So they're eating cat poo or dog poo. And you need to teach your children not to put their hands in their mouth if they're playing outside in the dirt, and to be careful. But they can cause visceral larval migrans where they migrate through tissues and cause damage. But these are the human type. I think actually it comes from College of Veterinary Medicine, so it may not be. They look just alike. But anyway, that's all we have for today. Thank you.